Hi everyone, this is Vicki, and I'm here to demonstrate, let's work through Lesson 4 in Photoshop CC 2019, Layer Basics. In this lesson, we're going to learn a lot about layers, including how to organize our artwork, create, view, hide, and select layers, rearrange layers, apply blending modes, resize and rotate, apply a gradient, apply a filter, add text and layer effects, and add an adjustment layer. And then we'll save a copy of this multi-layered file with the layers flattened. So something you want to know and understand about Photoshop is that every Photoshop file contains one or more layers. New files are generally created with a background layer, which contains a color or an image that then will show through the transparent areas of subsequent layers. All new layers in an image are transparent until you add text or artwork. You can think of layers as if you were working on a drawing that you then placed sheets of film or clear film or acetate on top of, and then added bits of artwork to each of those sheets of acetate or clear film. And layers in Photoshop works much the same way. You can change any of those individual layers without affecting the other sheets or layers. And then once everything is stacked together, you can see the entire composition. So we're going to work with this, and you'll see how that works. I'm going to open the end file here, 04NPSD, to kind of show you how this postcard is set up with a background layer and then multiple layers on top. So if you'll go to File, Open, and open up 04 Start, you'll have a picture of a pineapple, and I'd like you to go up to File, Save As, and save it as 04 Working. Make sure you go ahead and save it as a PSD file or Photoshop file so that you have all of your layers intact. Now we're going to start working on this postcard. Well, you can expand your layers panel if you need to. You can also open it from the window menu if it's not already open by clicking, making sure there's a check next to the layers, the word layers in the window menu. And you can also reset your Essentials workspace by clicking on the Reset Essentials from the very top of the window menu. You'll notice in our open file that some of the layers are visible. They have an eye icon next to them, and some are as of yet hidden. So right now you should have the background and the pineapple visible. Now our first task is we're going to add a photo of the beach to our postcard. So if you'll follow along with me and go up to File, Open, browse to wherever you have the lesson files, and open Beach PSD. Now we see in the Layers panel that there's only one layer, and it has been changed from a background layer to Layer 1. The reason for doing this is because there are certain restrictions to what you can do with a background layer. You cannot change the stacking order of a background layer. You cannot change the blending mode of a background layer or its opacity. So if you want to do those things, you have to convert it to a regular layer, and it's very easy to do. Just double click this, or if we go back over here to our working, we see there's a lock here. If I click that lock, it'll convert this background layer to a regular layer. If you want to add content to an image and simultaneously create a new layer for it, You can drag an object or a layer from one file into the image window of another file. We're going to drag the beach file over into the 04 working file. So we want to make sure they're both open and that the beach file is the one that is selected. We're going to change the name of layer 1 so that when it comes over it's a little more descriptive. So we'll just click on that and rename it beach. Now, there are different ways that you can arrange your windows. So if it's not already showing, you can go to Windows and you can arrange and you can go to 2-up horizontal. That'll give you, if you only have 2 files open, that just displays both of them. I actually have more than 2 files open, so I'm not going to do that. Just know that you can. However, all I'm going to do is select the Move tool, and I'm going to drag the beach image over to the 04 working tab, holding my mouse down, and just release my mouse. And that drops that image into our working file right above the background layer, or it should be, but I forgot to select the background. Have no fear, if you've forgotten to select the background, you can just drag it so that it is right above the background layer. So we can see the pineapple now, and because the pineapple is over the beach, we can only see a little tiny bit of the beach. And then we can just close the beach file. We don't need that anymore, and we don't need to save our changes. We now have 6 layers on the working file, and some are visible, some are hidden. So now we're going to hide the pineapple just by clicking the eye icon. And we're going to, I can turn it off or on, but we're going to work on the beach layer, so it might be handy to have the pineapple file hidden and out of the way. You can tell that this layer is selected because it's highlighted, and so any changes that I make right now are going to affect this active layer. I'm going to hide the background layer as well so that I can see all of the opaque areas here, and you can see that all of the area around the picture of the beach has this kind of screen on it, and that indicates that it's transparent. It's like a checkerboard. So we're going to add a white border around this beach image, so I'll go up to Layer, Layer Style, and I'm going to choose Stroke. I'm going to add a stroke around. I get a Layer Style dialog box, and we will put in our specifics for the stroke. So for the size, I want to go up to 5 pixels. You can either drag the slider or you can type in the number. I want the position to be inside. I want the blend mode to be normal and the opacity to be 100%. I want to change the color to white. And the way you do that is find white. There we go. Then I'll say OK, and a white border is now around my beach photo. Now, the order in which the layers of an image are organized is called the stacking order. And the stacking order determines how the image is viewed. It's easy to change the order of the stack in order to make certain parts of the image appear in front of or behind other layers. We'll do a little rearranging now so that the beach image is in front of another image that's currently hidden. So let's make the postage stamp, the flower, Hawaii, and background images, and pineapple, all visible by clicking on the icon next to their thumbnails. And the beach image is almost entirely blocked. So we'll drag it upwards and position it between the pineapple and the flower. And when I see those double blue lines, that indicates I'm in the right spot, and I can release my mouse. And now we see a lot more of the beach picture. It's above the pineapple. Excuse the sound of my book page turning. You can reduce the opacity of any layer to reveal layers below it. So I feel like the postmark is too dark on the flower. So we're going to edit the opacity of the postage layer and let the flower and the other images show through a little better. So we'll scroll up to the postage layer and select it. And then just above the layer is a little menu box, and one of them is opacity. So we'll click the arrow next to the opacity window and name, and then we can drag the slider down to about 25%. And if you watch, you can see that the postmark is fading as I move the slider. So now it's partially transparent, and I can save my work to preserve all that. You can apply different blending modes to a layer, and blending modes affect how the color pixels on one layer blend with pixels on the layer underneath. First, we'll use blending modes to increase the intensity of the image on the pineapple layer so that it doesn't look as dull as it does. And then we'll change the blending mode on the postage layer. So currently the blending mode is right here, and it's normal for the postage layer and it's normal for the pineapple layer. First, we'll hide the flower, the beach, and the words Hawaii. And then we'll right click or control click the pineapple layer, and we'll choose duplicate layer. I think, there we go. And then just say OK. And we get usually it says pineapple copy. It's kind of funny that it doesn't say that. But with pineapple copy selected, we're going to change the blending mode to overlay. And you can see as I go through here what all of the different blending modes do. But we're going to choose overlay. And what this does is it blends the pineapple copy layer with the pineapple original layer below it to create a more vibrant, colorful pineapple with deeper shadows and brighter highlights. If I turn off the visibility here, you can see the original, and now you can see the two that have been blended together using the overlay blending mode. Now we'll select the postage layer, and we'll change the blending mode to multiply. And the multiply blending mode multiplies the colors in the underlying layers with the color in the top layer, and what the result of that was that it made the postmark just a little bit stronger. At this point would be a good idea to save our work, so I'll do that, and we'll keep moving on. We can resize and transform layers. So I'm going to go back to my beach layer, click the visibility column to show the eye icon, and make that layer visible. Note that just turning on the visibility does not select it. You actually have to click on the layer itself to select it, and then we can apply some changes. I'm going to go up to Edit, and I'm going to go to Free Transform. When I do that, a bounding box appears around the beach image, and there's handles on each corner and on each side. So the first thing I'm going to do is resize and angle the layer. I'll drag a corner handle inward to scale the beach photo down about 50%. And you want to watch the width and height to make sure in order to get to that 50%. And then if you want to constrain everything, hold down the Shift key when you do it. And then I can just keep dragging until I get to 50%. Almost there. And again, if it's precision's what you need, you can type in 50%. I'm pretty happy, except that my height went down. It didn't constrain it very well, amazingly. I won't end this yet because I want to angle it. So with that bounding box still active, I'll position my mouse until I can see a curved double arrow, and then I can drag clockwise to rotate the beach about 15 degrees, and you'll see a little menu pops up to tell me just about when I get to 15 degrees. You can also, if you want to, enter in 15% up here in the rotate and get exactly 15%. Once I have that done, I can go ahead and commit my changes. And then I want to make the flower layer visible. I'm going to select the Move tool if it's not already selected. And with my beach photos layer still selected, I'm going to move the beach photo so that its corner is tucked underneath the flower and a little bit lower than the postmark. I'm trying to match the book pretty closely, so right about there. You can eyeball it any way you like. A good time to save since we've made some changes. And now we're going to use a filter to create some artwork. So we'll add a new layer with no artwork on it, which is equivalent to adding just a clear sheet of acetate to this layer stack. And then we'll use this layer to add some clouds to the sky using the Photoshop filter. So since new layers are added above the selected layer, we want to select the background layer and make it active. And then we can go down to create a new layer down at the bottom here of the layers panel. And a new layer appears above the background layer and below the pineapple layer. It doesn't have any content, so you can't see any changes. We'll go ahead and double click the name and rename it Clouds. As you work with layers, you'll find that taking the time to just rename and organize your layers will serve you well in the long run. It can quickly get really confusing. Now in the Tools panel over here, we're going to click the foreground color, and we want to select like a sky blue color from the color picker. So if you want to do the same values as the textbook, you can enter those values in the RGB by going red 48 and green 138 and blue 174. And that will give you exactly the same color as the book. The background will stay white. We'll say okay to that. Now that's changed. The background is white. And make sure your clouds layer is still active. And then go up to the filter menu, go to render, and go to clouds. Whoops, render clouds. Some realistic clouds then appear behind the image. I'm happy with that, so I'll go ahead and save my work. Now you can add a layer to an image as we did before by dragging an image file from anywhere really. We dragged from another open tab, but I could also drag from Bridge, or I could drag it from the window the Finder in a Macintosh, or Explorer in Windows. We'll go ahead and add another flower. And so if Photoshop fills up the monitor, you can go ahead and reduce the size of the window, which on Windows you would click the Restore button, which is two little squares overlapping one another in the upper right corner, and then drag the lower right corner of the Photoshop window to make it smaller. But on a Mac, you can click, which is what I'm using, I can click the green Maximize Restore button over here on the upper left, or I can simply just drag in the corner of my Photoshop window. Now I want to make sure the pineapple copy layer, and I'm going to go ahead and change the name of this since Photoshop didn't do it for me, and make it Photoshop copy so that everything is as in the book. I want it to be the active layer. And excuse me, I have to turn the page here. And then either in the, let's see, let me close this, in the Finder window or Explorer, you're going to navigate to where you have your Lessons folder. So I'll just go ahead and do that. Open up Lesson 4. And I'm looking for flower to PSD. Now I'll just drag that from my Finder onto my file. And it's going to drop in just above the pineapple copy. Now it's placed as a smart object, which is great because that's a layer that I can edit without making permanent changes. You're going to learn a little bit more about this in a future lesson, or actually I think you did a little bit with it last week in Lesson 5. But we'll go ahead and place this flower layer in the lower left-hand corner of the postcard so that about half of the top flower is visible, just about like that. And then we'll accept that transformation. I'll just hit enter or return. And our new layer is placed and positioned. Now we're ready to create some type. And we're going to use the horizontal type tool, which puts type on its own type layer. Then we'll edit the text and we'll apply a special effect. So let's make the Hawaii text visible. And we're going to add some text just below this layer and then add some special effects to both layers. So go up to the select menu and deselect layers so that nothing is selected in your layers panel. Then choose the horizontal type tool and choose Window Character in order to open up the character panel. We're going to choose a serif font, and if you want to follow the book exactly, we're going to use Birch Standard. We'll choose a font style. We're going to go ahead and stick with regular, but there's the other ones. We're going to use a kind of a large font. We'll go with 36 points. A large tracking value, and the book is using 250. This is the tracking, so I can type that in there, 250. Then we want to click on the color swatch and choose a shade of grassy green. So I'll kind of guesstimate a grassy green. Say OK to that. Click the faux bold button and the all caps button. And then select crisp from the anti-aliasing menu. Then click just below the H and type in Island Paradise. And if you notice, there was some placeholder text that appeared, but as I started typing, it was just replaced immediately. And then I can commit my text by clicking on the check mark up in the menu box, options bar. Now I have a layer named Island Paradise with a T thumbnail, indicating that this is a type layer. And it's at the top of the stack because I didn't have any other layers selected when I created this. And since rarely the text is perfect when you first type it in, we're going to go ahead and reposition this by selecting the Move tool and just finding, we want to center it below Hawaii. I'm looking for that little line that pops up. And I'll save my work after that. We're going to apply a gradient to the word Hawaii to make it more colorful. So first we'll select the letters and then we'll apply the gradient. We'll select the Hawaii layer and make it active. And then we're going to right click or control click the thumbnail in the Hawaii layer, which gives us a little different menu, and we want to select the pixels. And when we select the pixels, you'll see that the white lettering on this layer is selected. So now we have an area to fill, and we'll apply the gradient. Over in the Tools panel, there is a gradient tool, which we will select. And then we'll change the foreground color to a bright shade of orange. Let's kind of go over here and choose something really nice and bright. And say OK. And just double check to make sure that your background layer is still white. In the options bar, you can see there's a couple of drop-down menus here. And we want a linear gradient. So if you hold, I'm sorry, the way you choose that is over here. Right now we have a radial. Now we have a linear gradient chosen. There's a couple other options here. So make sure that linear is chosen. And then go to the thumbnail of the type of the gradient that you're applying. And this is called the gradient picker. And then you want to make sure that you've got foreground to background selected. And you can scroll over and see that there's different ones. So I'll make sure that foreground to background is selected. And then I can click anywhere outside to close that box. Now I just drag, making sure I still have my marching ants. I'm just going to drag from the bottom to the top of the letters with my mouse and then let go. When the pointer reaches the top, just go ahead and release the mouse, and the gradient extends across the type, starts with orange at the bottom and blends to white. I like that, so I'll deselect my type and save my work. Now we want to add a layer style. And you can enhance any layer by adding things like a stroke or a satin sheen or any other special effect from a collection that is built into Photoshop of automated and editable layer styles. These are really easy to apply and they link directly to the layer that you specify. And just like layers, layer styles can be hidden or revealed by clicking their eye icons in the layer panels. Layer styles are non-destructive, so you can edit them or remove them at any time. And you can copy a layer style to a different layer just by dragging the effect onto the destination layer. So earlier we used a layer style to add a stroke to the beach photo. Now we're going to use a different kind of layer style. We're going to add some drop shadows to the text to make it stand out. So we'll choose the Island Paradise layer, go up to our layer menu, go to Layer Style, and go to Drop Shadow. When this menu box, the Layer Style dialog box opens up, you want to make sure that preview is selected, and then you can move this to the side so that you can see what you're working on. And this is going to give you sort of a live view of what you're doing. You'll see that drop shadow is checked and it's also highlighted. So when this is highlighted, that means that these options apply to the drop shadow. Up here in the structure area, we're going to use global light, and that's a little check mark right here. And then we want to make sure that the blend mode is multiply. The opacity is 75%. You can see the changes as I type and change these options. The angle we want to be 78 degrees. The distance we want to be 5 pixels. The spread we want to be 30%. And the size we want to be 10 pixels. So as I'm making those, you can see that the drop shadow gets more intense. When I click on Use Global Light, it means that one master lighting angle is available in all of the layer effects that use shading. So if I set a lighting angle in any one of those effects, every other effect will use a global light. With Use Global Light selected, will inherit that same angle, and that can keep things looking cohesive. An angle determines the lighting angle at which the effect is applied to the layer. Distance determines the offset distance for a shadow or a satin effect. Spread determines how gradually the shadow fades towards the edges, and size determines how far the shadow extends. Click OK after all that to accept all those settings and to go ahead and apply the drop shadow. Now in the Layers panel, we see that a layer style appears nested in the Island Paradise layer. First we have the effects heading, and then under that the layer styles. If we had multiple layer styles, there'd be more listed underneath drop shadow. And an eye icon appears next to the effect and next to each effect. So if you want to turn it off, you can just click the visibility icon. So we're going to make sure that both icons appear And then we're going to copy this effect over to another layer. So using Windows, you would press Alt, and using a Mac, you would press Option, and then you're going to click on the effects listing and just drag it down to the Hawaii layer. And when I release my mouse, the same drop effects, the same drop shadow is applied to the Hawaii layer with the same settings. Now we'll do a little more work on the Hawaii layer, and we're going to add a layer, another layer style to that. So we'll go up to Layer, Layer Style. Whoops, we'll do this a different way, sorry. This time we'll go from the Effects menu from down below, and we'll click on Stroke. And you can see that is going to be added to our little effects menu. And we get this same dialog box. You can see that Photoshop recognizes that a drop shadow has been applied. And now we're applying a stroke. And because this is highlighted, we have this set of options that apply just for the stroke. So we'll change the size to 4 pixels. We'll put it on the outside this time. We'll leave the blend mode as normal. We'll make it 100% opacity, and we're going to change the color to a green color. So let's do something that looks pretty good, pretty close to the one we used for Island Paradise. Maybe just a little bit darker. I'll click OK, that adds the stroke. And that looks pretty good. You can see that we duplicated an effect over here, down here, but then we further modified this Hawaii layer by adding another layer style. Now we're going to add a drop shadow and a satin sheen to one of the flowers. So we'll go to the flower layer and select it, and go up to Layer, Layer Style, Drop Shadow. Get that familiar dialog box now, and I'm going to go ahead and just change the opacity to 60%, the distance to 13 pixels, the spread to 9%. Make sure global light is selected, blend mode is multiply, but don't click OK yet. Let's see if we can see this happening. I'm going to click on the word satin, and that selects it and reveals its options. I'm going to make sure that invert is selected and change the settings to the following. The color, which is next to the blend mode, I want to choose something that enhances the flower, something like a fuchsia maybe. Something like that maybe. And say OK to that. I'm going to change the opacity down to 20, and the distance will change to 22 pixels. So the satin effect applies interior shading to create a satiny finish. Then I'll click OK to apply both of these layer styles. And those are added below. I think this is a good time to save my work. So we've come a long way. Now I want to add an adjustment layer to apply some color and tonal adjustments without permanently changing the pixel values in this image. We've already used adjustment layers, so they should be somewhat familiar to you. And here I'm going to change the color of the purple flower by adding a hue saturation adjustment layer. So I'll go down to the flower, and just remember that an adjustment layer will affect all the layers below it in the stacking order unless a selection is active when you create it or you create a clipping mask. So I'll select flower 2. I will click the hue saturation icon up here in the adjustments panel, and if you hover over them, you'll see the little names pop up. We'll keep going till we get to hue saturation. In the properties panel, we'll change the hue to 43. We'll change the saturation to 19, bump it up, and we're going to leave the lightness at 0. Now this is affecting not only the flower, but our pineapple copy, the pineapple, the clouds, and the background layer. And although that's pretty interesting to look at, we only want to affect the flower 2 level. So I will right click on Windows or control click on Mac, the layer name on the hue saturation adjustment layer, and choose create clipping mask. Now you'll see a little arrow pointing downwards indicating that the adjustment layer is only being applied to the flower 2 layer. We're going to learn more about adjustment layer or clipping masks, but those are very handy ways to add very specific changes. All right, and then layer effects are automatically updated when you make changes to a layer, so you can edit the text and watch how the layer effects track the change. We'll go back up here to Island Paradise. We'll choose the horizontal type tool, and in the option bar we're going to go ahead and change the font size to 32 and then hit enter or return, and you can see that the font size changed immediately on our layer, and we didn't have to select the individual pixels. But because in Photoshop you can change settings for an entire type layer just by selecting it in the layers panel, as long as you have a type tool selected. So now we have Island Paradise in 32 point. And still using the horizontal type tool, we're going to click in between Island and Paradise, and we're going to add the word of. And as we type, the layer styles are applied to the new text. We don't have to add or do anything. But this was just to illustrate. We don't actually need the word of, so we're just going to go ahead and delete it. Go back to Island Paradise. And because we changed the size, we're probably going to want to select the Move tool and then reposition it. And let's save our work. Now we're almost finished. So the elements are almost all arranged correctly, and we're going to finish up by repositioning the postmark, and then we're going to add a white postcard border. So select the Move tool, and in the options bar, make sure that Auto Select is disabled. Select the postage layer, and then use the Move tool to move it to the right of the image. So in the book, it's across the bottom of the flower and extends off, goes across like this, approximately like that. Now we'll choose the Island Paradise layer, and we're going to create a new layer over it. Then we're going to select all, and we're going to select modify border. In the border selection, we'll make sure that 10 pixels is typed in for the width if it's not already, and click OK. Now a 10 pixel border is selected around the entire image, so we're going to fill that with white. We'll change our foreground color to white and choose Edit, Fill, and we're going to make sure that it says foreground color and click OK. Now I can deselect, and I will rename this border. All right, our postcard is looking pretty good. So I could save a copy of this as a PSD file somewhere safe in case I needed to make changes in the future. But if I'm finished editing this, I can merge or flatten all the layers to reduce the file size. And once you flatten an image, you can no longer work on individual layers. So you want to make sure that you're satisfied with all of your design decisions and won't need to return. I don't recommend that you flatten any files for our class until you're absolutely sure you've submitted any layered PSD files and that you won't be needing to go back and edit them again. So to appreciate what flattening does, you can see down here there's two numbers for the file size in the status bar down at the bottom. And the first number, 2.29 megabytes, indicates what the file size would be if I flatten the image. And the second, 27.7 megabytes, indicates the size that it is with all the layers. So this is a relatively small file. If I flatten it, this is a quite hefty file. So since I'm pretty sure I'm finished, I'm going to go ahead and flatten this. So select any tool except for the type tool. So you want to make sure that you're not in text editing mode. And then make sure that you've saved everything. We'll go up to image and we'll duplicate it. And then we're going to rename this, and we're going to rename it 04 flat. And we can leave it as a PSD, and since the book says to do that, I'm going to go ahead and add that extension and click OK. Now I can leave the flat file open. I can go ahead and close the working for file. And now I can flatten my copy. So I'll go up to the layers panel, or layers menu, I'm sorry, and go all the way to the bottom and go flatten image. All the layers are merged into the background layer and just one layer remains. Our new document is about 2.3 megabytes. And then I will save this. And now, even though I just chose save rather than save as, I'm going to get this dialog box. But I'll just go ahead and hit save, make sure it's going to the right spot, and save the flattened file. So I've got two versions, a one-layer flattened copy, as well as the original file in which all the layers remain intact. This concludes our lesson on layers. I hope you've enjoyed it and learned a little bit. I look forward to seeing your own work with layers and what you create in the future.